Hey, my friend, and welcome to Aligned to Rise, the podcast for ambitious women who are ready to rise above their symptoms, release old limitations, and fully rise into their true power and potential. I'm your host, Alyssa Chavez, functional nutritionist, performance coach, and former endo and infertility warrior who knows what it's like to feel held back by your body and your beliefs. I've taken a journey of true healing from the inside out so that I can show up feeling great in my body, confident and unstoppable. And now I'm here to help you do the same. Through a blend of functional nutrition and deep mindset work, this show will empower you to reclaim your vitality, trust your intuition, and live unapologetically in your purpose. If you're ready to align your body, mind, and spirit so you can rise to your highest potential, you're in the right place. Let's rise, my friend. This show was created for educational purposes only and should not be used as a replacement for medical advice or treatment. Hey, my friend, and welcome back to the podcast. So, today we're going to be talking all things period pain, which is a topic that is so very near and dear to my heart because it's been such a big part of my journey. So if you're new to the podcast here, just to fill you in a little bit, I have endometriosis myself, and for a long time struggled with those absolutely, completely debilitating periods. I'm talking to the point where I couldn't physically stand up or walk, much less go to work and function in normal life. That just wasn't a thing. It was so debilitating. It just affected my life in so many ways. And that really is what got me into the work that I'm doing today. And that's something that I've helped so many clients with over the past 5 years that I have been in practice as a functional nutritionist. And it's probably one of the things that I'm most passionate about, just because I fully understand how much your periods can really affect your life. And really, it's not just about the period pain. It can be other symptoms surrounding your periods as well. But today's episode is going to be really focused on period pain. And part of that too is that there are so many just societal and cultural myths surrounding periods. And these are all things that I definitely was taught/heard growing up. Things like period pain is just normal. Being in pain during your period is just part of being a woman. And of course, there's the good old, well, you should just take a pill and just push right through it. Now, what I want to let you know today as we dive into the episode is that period pain is common, absolutely. Many women experience period pain to some level or another, from mild discomfort all the way up to completely debilitating period pain like what I had. But just because it's common does not actually mean that it's normal. You having pain during your periods is actually a signal of something deeper going on in your body. Your body is communicating that something is out of balance. So what we're going to do in today's episode is we are going to take a look at why period pain happens from a root cause, whole body perspective. We're really going to take a look at what's underneath, like what actually goes on in your body that causes you to have that period pain. And this is going to be relevant for you whether you have no idea why you have period pain, or if you have a diagnosis like endometriosis or fibroids or something like that. This is still going to very much be relevant for you. And the best news is that you don't have to live like this, my friend. You really don't. This is something that can be worked with. There are so many things you can do to support your body. But what I'd love for you to walk away with today is an understanding of why period pain happens in the first place. Because the more that you understand how your body works, the better that you can learn how to support yourself along your own journey. So, starting off, I'd like to talk a little bit about the physiology behind period pain, and that means that we get to talk about prostaglandins. Woohoo! Now, if you've never heard of prostaglandins before, that's okay. Basically, they're compounds in your body. They're hormone-like compounds that are involved in things like uterine contractions, inflammation, pain signaling, and during menstruation, during your period, your prostaglandins help your uterus to contract to shed the lining. Now, I do want to say that your period is naturally a more inflammatory process in your body. However, like anything, there's a balance for that. And so when there's too many of these prostaglandins in your body, that can cause overly strong contractions, which can cause that cramping and that pain that so many women experience. So the real question here, the one that I like to ask, I always think of myself as a functional nutritionist. I always think of myself as being kind of like an investigator. We figure out one thing, okay, prostaglandins have something to do with period pain. So if prostaglandins are elevated, you're likely to have more period pain. But the thing is that I see so many people kind of just ending their investigation there and don't really dig deeper, whereas I like to ask the next question, which is, why are those prostaglandins elevated? So when we're looking from a functional perspective, which is the perspective that I take on everything that I do, what we're really looking at, and like so many things, it's not just one thing. So what I'm going to give you is a list of some of the most common reasons that those prostaglandins can become elevated. And then we'll take a look at some of these things on a deeper level as well. So some of the reasons that those prostaglandins can become elevated and which ends up with you having more period pain can be things like chronic inflammation, poor balance between your omega-3s and omega-6s, which are a type of fat. We'll talk about that more in just a second. There is blood sugar instability. Blood sugar imbalance is a very common one. Gut dysfunction, which leads to immune activation. Estrogen dominance. This is an interesting one because estrogen increases the enzymes that produce prostaglandins. So if there's obviously we all need estrogen. The goal here is not to get rid of all the estrogen, but when there's too much or it's out of balance with progesterone, it can really impact the amount of prostaglandins in your body, which can impact the amount of period pain. And this is definitely true in a condition like endometriosis, which is estrogen driven, not caused by estrogen, mind you. I've talked about this on previous episodes, but is driven by endometriosis. And so this is definitely a consideration if you are an endo gal like me. And then there's also stress hormones, primarily cortisol, which drive those inflammatory cascades in your body. Now, I want to rewind on this a little bit and first of all say that cortisol is actually anti-inflammatory when it's in balance. It's actually anti-inflammatory. Most people don't think of it that way. But when it's out of balance, when it's too high or it's too low, which is super common, I test cortisol levels frequently in my practice with my clients I work with, and I often see cortisol levels high or low, and that can cause issues and more inflammation. So, important thing to note here is just that prostaglandins don't get elevated, don't become excessive in a vacuum. They're often responding to an inflammatory internal environment. And that's really the heart of the work that I do as a functional practitioner, is working on getting to the bottom of that. So that's what I wanted to share with you all today, is kind of the thought process and how that works. So let's kind of talk about this in a few different layers. I mentioned some of those key reasons that those prostaglandins can become elevated, but let's unpack some of these. And really what I want to start with is talking about inflammation in general, because inflammation is such an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to period pain, when it comes to endometriosis, and inflammation is super common. And it's also one of those things where people, I hear people say all the time, like, oh yeah, you have inflammation, and kind of just end the conversation there. Whereas what I like to do is take it to the next level of looking at, why is there inflammation? Why is your body inflamed in the first place? And when we're talking about that, we're thinking about things like gut imbalances. This is why I very often will start with working on the gut when I work with clients, because very often I see when I use a test called a GI map in my practice, which is a stool test. And when I get those back, I do those with pretty much every client I work with. And when I get those back, I very often see issues like dysbiosis, which is an imbalance in the gut microbiome. There might be an imbalance or an infection related to bacteria or parasites or yeast. There may also just be an issue with permeability, where the lining of your gut isn't as robust as it could be. And all of those things can definitely lead to more inflammation in your body. So balancing out the gut can definitely be super, super important. Another thing to consider when it comes to inflammation is food reactivity, right? Your body needs to be able to, digest food and have things all still be in balance, but it's very common for our immune systems to want to react to certain foods, and getting to the bottom of what that is in the first place is super important. Now, some of what I'm talking about here is actual true food sensitivities and allergies. Some of the common ones I see are things like gluten, dairy, even soy and corn. Can be fairly common foods that can contribute to reactivity and inflammation. However, also what I'm talking about is just foods that don't necessarily sit well with your body. So that might be foods that are just super processed and, those things that we consider junk food, your fast food, your oils that aren't so great for your body, having too much sugar, things like that, alcohol, all these things that, are just part of our diet if you're eating kind of more of a standard American diet, but also can definitely become an issue if you're having too much of those, and it can contribute to that picture of inflammation. So definitely something to consider there. Also, speaking of sugar, blood sugar dysregulation is a huge thing when it comes to inflammation. That's definitely one of the top foundational things that I work on with clients, is just how to eat for blood sugar stability. And yes, this 1,000% matters, even if you don't necessarily have blood sugar issues, like you're not insulin resistant or diabetic or anything like that. This still applies to you, because many, many, many people have some level of blood sugar dysregulation, even if it's not something that's diagnosable. And this is again where I really believe that the functional work shines through, because it allows us to see on a deeper level what's happening with the blood sugar, even with things that may not necessarily be caught in a doctor's office, right? So when I am working with a client, I typically like to see blood work at some point along the way. And some of the markers that I like to see include, I do like to see just a fasting glucose, which that's a pretty standard practice for medical offices to test for as well. But they typically are not going to test for things like insulin or HbA1c unless there's a reason to. It comes back to insurance and liability and all the things, mostly insurance. But when I run blood work with a client, I like to order all of those markers, even if there hasn't been issues there in the past, because it allows us to see with a little more nuance and a little bit more information what's really going on with your blood sugar on a day-to-day basis, so that we can correct imbalances before they become a bigger thing. Because even on a minor level, blood sugar dysregulation can still very much contribute to inflammation. I know that this is something that was huge for me, a huge shift when I was working on my own health journey as well. And then we come to things like toxins in our environment. And these are things like pesticides, herbicides, chemicals that are found in our household products, things like that. which can just contribute to the overall inflammation picture, can also definitely be a major hormone disruptor. We're going to talk about that in a little bit when we circle back to the estrogen piece of it. But cleaning up your environment as best you can, right? Because we don't control the whole world, but at least inside of your home and your day-to-day life, you can definitely have a little more control over toxins. That's more what I'm talking about. Chronic stress is definitely a thing. We're going to talk more about nervous system in a bit. And then just supporting your detoxification pathways in general, your liver, your elimination. Basically, are you peeing and pooping daily? That really matters when it comes to inflammation and when it comes to your period pain. And I know this is probably a little different than you may have expected when it comes to a conversation about period pain, but all of the things that I just listed can actually contribute to those elevated prostaglandins, which can then lead to more painful periods, more uterine contractions, even more heightened pain sensitivity, things like that. So definitely taking care of those sources of inflammation. And note, by the way, that it's not necessarily going to be all of those things for everybody. For some people, it may be one or two things on the list. Maybe your main things that are contributing to inflammation could be a gut imbalance and some environmental toxins, for example. It could be something like that or some other combination that's on the list. Again, this is why I love working with people to help to get to the bottom of what might be contributing to inflammation in your unique body, not anyone else's. So what we're seeing here, the pattern that we're seeing, is that period pain really becomes a downstream effect of what's going on in your body. It's not the problem in and of itself, if that makes sense. Now, the other piece that I think it's really important to speak to is the layer of looking at hormone patterns and estrogen. Now, I want to say that looking at those sources of inflammation should be your starting point, always and forever, because all of the things that I mentioned in that last little section of the episode here is all going to contribute to your hormone health. So it's not a matter of just tackling the estrogen in and of itself right away. It's really more a matter of figuring out what might be causing that imbalance with the hormones in the first place, if that's even an issue, right? Because period pain doesn't necessarily mean that you have estrogen dominance. Not for everybody. It certainly can be part of the picture. But at the end of the day, when there is a hormone imbalance, knowing that there's a hormone imbalance still is not really a root cause approach, because hormones, as I've talked about many times before on this podcast, hormones are chemical messengers. They are simply sending signals from one part of your body to another. They are not the root of all evil. They are not the source of the problem. However, they are an important part of the conversation, which is why I wanted to bring it up today. Because, as I mentioned before, estrogen does stimulate that prostaglandin production. And when you have too much estrogen circulating in your system, it can cause that uterine lining to thicken more. It can increase inflammation. It can intensify cramps and clotting, things like that within your cycle. And so what we want to look at is, why might that estrogen be out of balance in the first place? Part of that can be related to estrogen detoxification, which is primarily happening through your liver and your gut. I will say step one of that is just make sure that you're actually pooping every day. Constipation is actually one of the largest causes of that estrogen dominance, interestingly enough, or just having kind of slower motility in general, where it allows some of the estrogen that was on route to elimination to end up being reabsorbed into your system. Also supporting your liver, that helps to detoxify that excess estrogen, super important too. And then I mentioned before some of the environmental toxins. There is a particular category of environmental toxins called xenoestrogens. And these are essentially man-made chemicals, compounds that are found in many of our household products that we use, from cleaning products to makeup to household things that we use on a day-to-day basis. And basically what happens is these chemicals end up mimicking estrogen in your body. They end up connecting with estrogen receptor sites and blocking your natural estrogen from doing what it needs to do. And that can really become an issue. So working to avoid those xenoestrogens can be super, super important when it comes to finding that balanced hormone health. We talked a little bit before about blood sugar. That's really important when it comes to your estrogen hormone balance as well, as does chronic stress. So, period pain is often less about just bad periods and so much more about a body that just can't regulate inflammation and hormones efficiently. And the more that we can support that process, the better off that we are. And then, so we talked about inflammation, we've talked about estrogen and hormones. The other piece that I think it's really, really important to bring into the conversation, and the part that I've been working on more and more in my own life and in my practice as well, is the category of nervous system, as well as in this case, pain perception. And when I say pain perception, I don't mean, oh girl, this is all in your head, you're not really in pain, or hey, you just have a low pain tolerance, you should just suck it up. That is not what I mean. I'm talking about physiologically how your brain is actually perceiving pain, because that is a real thing. Now, first, let's talk about just nervous system in general, because so many of us these days find ourselves, and I know this definitely was the case for me, much less so now because I've done a lot of work on this, but previously it definitely was a thing for me to be in a state of just chronic stress all the time. And what happens is that when you're in a state of chronic stress, it tends to keep your body in that fight or flight mode. It tends to ramp up cortisol levels, at least in the short term. What typically happens is that when you're in that chronic stress mode, your cortisol really can skyrocket at first, and then eventually it just kind of crashes down to the point where you have really low cortisol. There's kind of an ongoing process behind that. And that chronic stress can also lead to heightened pain sensitivity. And that's really important as well, because that really truly is a huge part of the pain that we experience, is how our brain and our nervous system actually responds to a stimulus of some kind, right? Pain really isn't an entirely physical process. It's more than anything a product of what happens within your nervous system. Because your pain of any kind, any sort of pain, it's processed in the brain. So if you think about, because I think many of us have probably experienced something like this before. Maybe you're in the middle of something, or you're having some kind of adrenaline rush and you injure yourself in some capacity, even as minor as just bumping your elbow into something or getting a small cut, although this definitely can be true with major injuries as well. But how often has this happened where you don't really notice it because there's so much else going on, and then later on you touch that part of your body and go, oh, what's going on there? Why is that all bruised and sensitive? And then you realize, oh, that's probably from when I whacked my elbow during that moment in time, and I just didn't even experience the pain in the moment. That's very common, and that's, again, because it's not just physical, it's about how pain is being processed in the brain. Now, when you have a nervous system that's dysregulated, that can actually lower pain thresholds. It can increase uterine tension, and it can amplify that inflammatory signaling in your body. So how does that dysregulated nervous system come about that causes all of those things to happen? Well, part of it can come from just that, the cultural norm of wanting to be high achieving, pushing through, go, 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 hustle culture. It can come from being in a place of burnout. It can even be connected with trauma. It can be connected with feeling unsafe in your body. So many things, right? Because a body that doesn't feel safe enough to soften is going to be a body that's in more pain, right? A body that doesn't feel safe enough to relax and soften is a body that's probably going to experience more pain. And that can show up in many different ways, but period pain is the part that we're really talking about today. So, health of your nervous system really matters. So, when we're talking in the grand scheme of things, the period pain, everything that we talked about so far today is going to matter for absolutely everybody. However, I think it's important to note that not all period pain is the same. Because for some people, period pain is simply, I shouldn't say simply because I know that it can very much affect your day-to-day life, but basically it is that uterine contraction that's causing the pain. However, there are also certain conditions, primarily endometriosis, fibroids, things like that, that can actually really significantly contribute to that period pain as well. And it's so much more than just the uterine contraction at that point, because there are actually growths involved, there are lesions involved. And so I think that that's important to note as well, because sometimes people are doing all the things and still having some struggles, and that's when it's always good to investigate deeper. Now, that being said, everything that we've talked about today is very much going to impact conditions like endometriosis and fibroids. So, because I work with many, many clients in my practice some people have period pain in and of itself. Some people have an endometriosis diagnosis or suspected endometriosis at least. And some people have fibroid diagnosis as well. And all of the things that we talked about are going to significantly help all of those conditions as well. But I just think it's important to note that, it can be a little bit of a different beast when you're coming to that, right? Because endometriosis, it is more than just the uterus cramping. Endometriosis is really an inflammatory disease. It is an immune system related disease. It is also estrogen driven. It is also impacted by nervous system sensitization. And the pain that you experience is maybe partially the actual uterine contraction, but there are also physical lesions in your body that can very much contribute to that period pain, because those lesions can be attached to places that are very, very sensitive, like your bowels and other areas inside of your abdomen that are very sensitive to what's going on in there. So I think that's important to note as well. And same thing with fibroids. Uterine fibroids is another thing that can really contribute to pain. And similarly to endometriosis, those fibroid growths can be estrogen responsive. They can also contribute to increased pressure in your pelvic region and bleeding and cramping and all of the things. And those fibroids, again, are often related to impaired detoxification, the overall estrogen load in your body, the inflammatory terrain. So I just wanted to kind of distinguish that and let you know that if you have one of those conditions, if you already know or suspect, that everything we're talking about today still applies to you. And secondly, that there may be more factors to look at if you have a condition like that. So everything I've talked about so far is really kind of the meat and potatoes of supporting period pain, but there are a few more things as I was digging through all of my resources when it comes to period pain and just thinking about what I work with people, my clients within my practice as well. And there are a few more things that I wanted to mention also that can contribute to period pain that may be worth investigating for some people. So that list includes things like mineral imbalances, magnesium, zinc are really important ones. Iron is another one that can be really important, as well as vitamins like vitamin D. All of those things actually can impact period pain if they're out of balance. Thyroid dysfunction is another thing to look at. Pelvic floor tension. So sometimes it can be actual physical pulling from the muscles of the pelvic floor that can impact pain. Poor circulation, especially if you're somebody who just tends to sit a lot. Maybe the pelvic region is not getting as much circulation as it could. Things like scar tissue and adhesions, if you've had past surgeries, or if you do have something like endometriosis, can definitely, and I didn't mention before, but adenomyosis, which is like the twin sister of endo, can definitely be a factor as well. And even this is something I've been talking about more and more on the podcast, but even your emotions can be at play when it comes to period pain and pelvic pain in general, because that is one of the areas that we tend to kind of store some of those stuck emotions, things like grief, anger, fear that can be stored within your pelvis. And so just if we're thinking holistically, we're thinking whole body approach, there may be multiple factors to look at. Because period pain is rarely just a single fix. It's rarely one-dimensional. There can be many, many things that contribute to period pain. All right, my friend, I hope that was helpful for you today to really break down where that period pain is coming from. I know I always find that helpful to actually understand what in the world is happening inside of my body. So it's not just a guessing game. But I just want to remind you here that pain is not the enemy. Pain is simply a signal from your body, right? And as I like to talk about a lot, your body is not broken. Your body is communicating with you. And the more that we learn to listen, the better that we can feel. Because period pain is not something to simply override. It's something to understand, right? So this is really a big part of the work that I do as a practitioner. I absolutely love working with people with period pain. And in fact, so much so that I've created some new resources and offerings and things for people who are struggling with issues just like that. So one thing is a brand new resource that I created for you, kind of putting together some of the top strategies that I have used with myself and with clients when you are experiencing period pain. Of course, everything we're talking about today is kind of on a longer term basis, how to support your body. But there's also those moments when it's just, okay, I'm in pain right now and I need support. And so that's really what this resource is all about. It's called the Period Pain Playbook. This is completely free. You can just download a copy of it. The link is in the show notes. And it gives you a play-by-play of all of my favorite ways to tame that period pain when it happens, so that you have a tool belt when that comes up, while you're also, of course, addressing the deeper reasons behind the period pain that we talked about today, because sometimes we need both. Let's be real. And the other thing that I have going on, for those of you who really do want to start to dig in and make some changes on all of the things that I've talked about today, I've created a brand new program. It is a 3-week, 21-day program called the Aligned Period Reset. That's going to be starting up on February 11th. And I would love for you to join me. This is a group program. It's fully virtual, so you can join me from anywhere in the world. And during that 3-week period of time, we are going to be talking about all things supporting your periods, particularly period pain, but this can definitely be helpful for other period-related symptoms as well, like PMS, bloating around the periods, mood changes, energy changes, all of the things, all of the symptoms that can come up surrounding your periods. And again, this can be helpful whether you have period pain, period issues, you have a diagnosis like endo or fibroids. Absolutely will be helpful for you just in general. And let's just get you back on track as we start off 2026 here. So I really look forward to seeing you there within the Aligned Period Reset. Definitely check out that free resource as well. The links to all of that can be found in the show notes. So just hit pause on the episode really quick before it finishes up. Drop down into the show notes, find those links, sign yourself up, and I can't wait to see you there, my friend. All right, thanks so much for joining me and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for tuning in to Aligned to Rise. If this episode spoke to you, take a moment to share it with a friend who needs this message too. And then don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'll see you next time, my friend. Let's rise together.